Welcome to the Dream 100 Show, the epicenter of influence, collaboration, and exponential growth. You're about to discover the power of relationships. Dream 100 relationships. And you're one relationship away from a totally different business and life. This is your host, Michael Tesner.
Hey there, and welcome to this week's episode of the Dream 100 Show. I wanted to add some more context and some more fun stories about my recent experience going to the global FNCS, or Fortnite, esports competition in Fort Worth, Texas. Now, the interesting thing among this whole weekend, and the weekend in and of itself was absolutely insane, and I'm going to share all the fun details. But what I realized in being there in person, that catapulted by probably a factor of 100 how fast I could start to move the needle with relationships. So I'm a guy that at many times prefers to be sitting behind a computer. And the Dream 100 framework that I've taught revolves around a computer, podcast, sending gifts, direct mail, handwritten letters, building your own association, for example, and or mastermind group of similar people. And it definitely involves at some point getting together or going to certain events, but that typically is not the core aspect. And the reason behind that is that some of these events are widely expensive, and some people just legitimately cannot travel. I have 4 kids. My wife does the majority of everything for our kids. However, I still have to help out. And there's 4 kids. So if I were gone 3-4 weeks out of the month, every month, it would be very, very challenging for her and for the kids. But what I kind of looked at was finding a couple of events during the course of the year that are going to have your Dream 100 audience sitting in the audience, speaking from stage, advertising as a vendor, wherever they are. The power of connection in person cannot be discounted. Cannot be discounted. So if you don't listen to the rest of this podcast, and I really hope you do, because you're going to learn and hear some fun stories that are being shared nowhere else ever. This power of getting in person, picking a couple of events really needs to be part of your marketing strategy in going forward. It will just amplify. So in my case, how does this relate to what I'm doing? So one of the Fortnite players is a gentleman, kid, he's 17, just turned 17, named Peterbot. And that's his handle, Peter B-O-T, Peterbot. And I've had the privilege over the last 6 to 12 months or more to kind of get to know him and his family. And his family's from Buffalo. He actually lives in a house with a couple of other professional Fortnite players in Dallas, Texas. One thing that I didn't know about Fortnite was that the servers to where the game is they're located in Dallas, Texas. So the closer you are to a server, and this goes for websites as well, the faster or the lower your ping is. So they say that there's a slight advantage to being in Dallas, Texas. If you're playing against someone that's not, it's milliseconds, but milliseconds in this game can mean all the difference in the world. So as I've got to know him, there's a lot of things that I've learned about the esports industry. And one of the biggest ones is that the amount of scams in this industry is so high. And the way that it works is as a player continues to kind of grow in fame and popularity, and usually that's by earning more money. So you play these tournaments and you win. Now, the spoiler alert is that this player won and is considered by pretty much, if not everyone, to be the current #1 Fortnite player in the entire world. In the entire world. So, and his earnings are public. He shares his earnings. I'm not going to share other stuff about sponsorship money and things like that, but his earnings are public. We're talking well over $500,000 of just winning some tournaments this year. Life-changing money, especially at the age of 17. But the way that these kind of houses work and teams and agents and all those kind of gaming organizations is that they tend to look for a couple of players that are really good. And then they try and find a big sponsor. And they'll say, Mr. or Mrs. Sponsor, can you give us seed money of X amount of money in return, our players will do streaming and they'll promote your brand and all of that good stuff. But what I found is that, and that's how a lot of these organizations start, they've got to get some seed money. And what tends to happen is that they'll say, hey, Mr. Player, Mrs. Player, I'll give you, and I'm just making up random numbers. They're legitimate numbers that some players get, but let's say $5,000 a month. So I'll give you $5,000 a month, and I need you to do 5 hours of streaming, a couple of videos. So very traditional kind of influencer type marketing. But where the scams start to come in is that these organizations typically don't have a really good path to monetize. They go into this and they want to lock up some of the best players, but they might have one sponsor that gives them, let's say, $100,000. But this organization might go and sign 5 players at $5,000 a month or more. They usually also try and get all the players in a house. The reason that they do that is that they want them together so they can be producing content. If you have your player in a house, you can put in a content person in the house to capture lots of other random content. But where the scams start to come in are a couple things. Number one, more often than not, these people that sign the players run out of money very quickly. If they don't have the connections, the contacts with big companies that have deep pockets for sponsorships, they're paying these players. They're also paying the house fee. In many cases, the houses are $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a month. So let's say you have a house of 5 players and they're all equally good. And you say, we're going to give you each $5,000 a month and we're going to pay for the house. Let's say the house is $15,000. You've got $25,000 to the players, another $5,000 and $10,000 for the house. You're at $40,000 a month. If that sponsor gave you $100,000 in seed money, what happens when that runs out? So they kind of lock up the players and then they stop paying, maybe after the first month or the second month. And they might then start paying for the house, but they stop making the $5,000 a month payments. So the amount of churn within these players is astronomical. The other thing that they do is they lock up these kids and these players because when you hear $5,000 a month, for a lot of people, like, that's good money. And they sign these contracts without lawyers, without agents like myself. They just sign these things away. And well, they didn't just realize what they signed. They committed to doing these 10 things and these 10 things. So in my case, my client, Peterbot, he's in this house and we have a list of what he contractually has to do. But a lot of times these people that are running the organizations, they're going to try and get some extra content, or will you do this or will you do that? And in their mind, I mean, they're still paying, but if it's not part of their contract, they often just end up doing it unless they have somebody that's starting to advise them. The other thing that happens is that they miss the most important aspect to this entire game. They miss the aspect of building brand. The players, so I got to meet a ton of players. The most famous players that I met, and when I'm saying famous, it doesn't mean best players, it means most famous online. It would be a guy named, I believe it's like Cypher, Clicks, Booga. Those are the 3 that were the most well-known. They have, I think Clicks, for example, has millions and millions of followers. Booga has millions and millions of followers. Cypher PK, so it's not Cypher, it's Cypher PK. He's got like 10 million plus followers, probably even more. And I got to meet these people, but they've started to build brand. They've started to put out more content with their face, with their personality. A lot of these gamers, what they'll do is they'll start streaming. So you're streaming and you're talking as you're playing the game. If you turn your camera on when you're streaming, you start to build more brand. If you have your camera off, your brand is a little bit more your voice, your name, but there's no face to it. Much more powerful if you're streaming and you have your camera on. But where a lot of these younger players, or even the players that don't have an agent or someone like myself or a marketing person, they sign these contracts and they don't realize that they're essentially giving their entire brand to these companies. So my player, for example, had a different company that was working with him and got him to do a lot of videos that were nowhere in the contract and started grabbing that brand and putting it on their platforms. So instead of the player growing their brand, growing their followers, which as you grow those followers, that only helps grow everything. So the more followers you have, the bigger sponsorship deals you can get, everything just grows. But if these gaming organizations start taking it and putting it on their socials, they're going to get the love, they're going to get the views, they're going to get more likes and shares and comments and subscribers. That's all going over to them. So a lot of these gamers, their careers are short-lived because it's not easy to be the best. Like right now, he's the best. I hope that continues, but there could be another young kid that comes in and is now is better. And if you don't have that brand equity built, your followers can start to go down, your reach starts to go down, you're not nearly as popular. So the secret sauce in the influencer space, in the gaming space, if you're looking to grow this, is really to start to build brand. And build your brand around you on all of your social platforms, your story, your documentary, your rise to fame, your behind the scenes stuff. And as I was having these conversations with some of the different players, there were only 3 or 4 of them that actually had legitimate representation, that knew kind of what brand was, knew how to work with other sponsors and partners and at least negotiate a little bit. And really, they started to figure out how to monetize what they've done. But most of them, you're not taught that stuff. And if you're younger, a lot of these things that I learned over the course of a couple of days, there were some amazing players that had, millions of followers, and they couldn't figure out why they weren't making any money. When you have that amount of followers, unless you're not posting any content or you're never streaming, you're able to make money, even just from the YouTube revenue. You can be making thousands and thousands of dollars a month on videos that are older. But it's a matter of building up that brand and knowing that you're in control. That was just a huge takeaway for me. The other thing that I realized is that there's a really large market for content creators that are then reporting on all of these gamers. So there was a whole section of 15 people that had personalities as a Fortnite commentator. Never in a million years did I think that would be a thing. Those people had, a lot of them had followers and followings that were larger than some of the best players. So why is that the case, or how is that the case? Because they're consistently putting out content. And if you start to look at their content, they know that secret sauce. They know how to have good hooks and controversial headlines. One of the biggest hooks that people like to use with my player, Peterbot, is they'll say Peterbot's cheating. It's a controversial hook. It grabs their attention. It's clickbait. He obviously proved that he wasn't cheating and hasn't been cheating because everyone had the exact same computer, mouse, micro, all that kind of stuff at the event. And there's people literally walking around monitoring you. But these content creators will put that kind of content out and they'll start to grow their followers. So if you're looking in certain industries, you don't necessarily even have to be the person that is the most well-known player or in owning that XYZ business or in that industry. You could be talking about the industry as a whole. So I want you to think about that a little bit. Take a look at the industry that you're in, and what if you're putting out a little bit more generic content to cast a little bit of a wider net about the industry as a whole, and that continues to kind of grow your following across your various social networks. The other stuff that I realized is that as I was kind of walking around behind the scenes, most of these people they have built certain personas. They have their TV personality, and then they have their in real life personality. So a lot of them that you might see on video, and I'm sure this is similar in the celebrity world, but what you see is not what you get with a lot of these players. A lot of them have these huge personalities and they're swearing and in your face, and then you meet them and you have a casual conversation and they're just really chilled. And they're no, I do that for show and for likes, and that they love that kind of clickbaity kind of stuff. But they've started to learn how to master content marketing. The people, again, that I met that, again, really started to kind of grow in terms of their fame, and the people that were getting a lot of cheers were the ones that had the most followers. They were not the best players. Clicks and Booga, they both performed. Neither of them were in the top 10. Maybe one of them was in the top 10. I have to pull the list, but I know Booga, I think he finished 14th, and he has a huge following and has made many, many millions of dollars, and I believe he's 19. But they have figured out the content game. Then they figured out how to then take their content and start to build relationships, and without them necessarily knowing, because they're not seeing this as the Dream 100, for example. They start networking with this player, in that content creator. And then they all start growing each other's followings by going on each other's shows, on each other's podcasts, on each other's streams. It's the exact same strategy that I'm teaching you, because now these people are getting introduced to Booga's audience or Click's audience, and then they're getting introduced to Peterbot's audience, and everyone is growing. Your followers aren't going to be going down. So you go on someone's show that's very famous, they do the exact same thing with you. A rising tide lifts all boats. Now, the other stuff that I found to be very interesting was there is an organization that partners with or works for Epic Games, the people that own Fortnite. And I would say that they did a absolutely disastrous job on getting sponsors, working with the media. So because I write for Forbes and Entrepreneur, I was able to get a media pass. It was the sloppiest experience I've ever seen. There was limited to no communication. They had two big sponsors of the event, one of which was NASCAR. Most of these people that are in the audience that were watching, 8 years old, 7, 10, 12, 15, like they're not driving. And yeah, some of them I'm sure watch NASCAR, but the other sponsor was a good one. I don't remember their exact name, but they produce really good gaming chairs. That one made sense to me. But why weren't there other sponsors, food brands that it didn't make a ton of sense to me. I thought it was a huge miss. Why didn't they better organize some player meet and greets during the actual event? There was some that were kind of afterwards with a couple people from the media, but they threw up some great, the merch line was through the door every day to the place where we actually didn't get the merch we wanted. It was sold out. A huge miss opportunity. I was watching all the different hashtags that were being used. They didn't have anyone that was constantly using hashtags and constantly updating, like every minute. So if you're going to put on events like that, if you're going to go through that, you need to have the back end stuff completely dialed in. You need to have the people that are sponsoring the event. You've got to have that list extremely deep and wide so that you're able to get more exposure. You're able to bring in some more revenue. You can do more exciting things. So I don't know if, and it wasn't to me a last minute thing. These dates are done well in advance. But I think that the organization as a whole, whether the company that's putting it out, I don't know what kind of relationship they have, but it was definitely not up to par at all. But at the end of the day, I mean, these players, they're just kids that are having a fun time playing, and some of them, like my client, they're making a ton of money. But if you can then start to nail down, and maybe there's something, like maybe you're a great poker player, whatever it is, the downside is that someday someone's going to come in that's going to be much better than you. But if you are able to strike when the iron is hot, which is what we're doing now, when the player is really well known, you strike when the iron's hot, you start crafting those deals. But if you play the long game, which is the exact thing that I teach you with the Dream 100, if you play the long game by building brand, building relationships, putting in your dues, putting in your time, you'll be able to build a brand that far outlasts you. Look at the professional sports players that haven't played in 10, 15, 20 years that are making millions and millions of dollars on sponsorships and events and speeches and books because they continued to move their brand. They didn't just stop. That is how you continue to grow in this industry. But all in all, it was an amazing experience. I had the privilege of meeting the player that came in second place. I believe it was Thomas HD. He came up and gave me a hug and was like, great job to your player. I met him the day before and said, I hear that you're like the best player in the world, but you always come in second. And I hope I didn't jinx him because he came in second. But he was an amazing kid. Like all these people, they were genuinely just love what they're doing. But the opportunity in front of them is far tremendous, far greater than anything I could have ever expected or experience. So I encourage you to check out the fascinating world of esports. It's an amazing world, a heck of a lot of fun. So I wanted to share this content with you just to kind of give you a little bit more of a fun take on some of these things, but also to really talk about that importance of the relationship building and playing that long game. Michael Tasner signing off. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night. I'll see you next week.